2024 years.
Yep.
Since the year of our Lord's birth.
Yeah.
Death.
Miscalculated.
Year of birth.
Yeah, he was born in 6 BC, but
he wasn't born at 0. There's more than 3 wise men. What can you believe anymore?
It wasn't in a stable. It was probably in a house.
Yeah. That it wasn't a star, it was a comet. Yeah.
Yeah.
So many things ruining my Christmas and my concept of time. But here we are, January 2024. We did not have Sermon Plus last week, so hopefully you guys enjoyed a little bit of time with your family. Mine was all sick. Oof. I feel like everybody I've talked to in the last 3 weeks has been sick. So happy to kick off the new year. And we have some really exciting things in store for January and the days ahead, which we can talk a little bit at the end, talk about those things. But Pastor Mike, why don't you give us a quick overview of this last Sunday?
Yeah, we just did kind of like a in-between sermon pretty much, kind of connected to the Advent series, of course. And, you know, the wise men showed up after Jesus' birth, so good time to kind of investigate that little story. And so I just encourage people to think about actually all the Gospels from the IPR, identity, purpose, and response. And so that's what we looked at. And, you know, the identity of Jesus according to Herod, and then the wise men, the purpose of Jesus as our great shepherd king, which personally was very encouraging to me. And then we just analyzed the responses of how Herod was deceptive and violent, and then the religious leaders were just kind of like passive, and they knew about it intellectually.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned religious privilege. They were the privileged elite, but they didn't even bother to go the 5 miles to see if it was in fact the Messiah. So,
which is crazy. It really is crazy. You harped on that a little bit, and it's like, yeah, that is absolutely astounding.
Yeah. And, you know, then you look at the people who seemingly didn't have religious privilege. These wise men show up out of the east, 550 miles, the shepherds, yeah. And, you know, we saw their devotion, their worship. Really, I think you could argue as well, they're kind of like the Lord must have revealed some good, like, biblical theology for them to travel all that way and recognize Jesus as the Messiah. I didn't really highlight it, and this is the place to do that type of thing, Sermon Plus. They called it His star. Really interesting. They knew that wasn't just some random star. That was His star. So anyway, they, you know, despite being outsiders, Matthew's definitely setting them up as an example of devoted worship. And so maybe we'll start right there with that question for you guys. When you hear an example or see the example of the wise men like that, and you hear, what does it mean to be devoted to Jesus? How do you guys respond to that? What do you guys think?
Do you remember the conversation about priorities? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my mind goes there pretty immediately because I think to myself, well, I'm devoted to a lot of different things. Like, just like I have a lot of priorities.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, what, you mentioned this verse, Luke 16:13, also in Matthew 6, no servant can serve 2 masters. He will either hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other.
Mm-hmm.
Example there, you cannot serve both God and money. What's Jesus' point? His point is that, you know, you can truly only give your devotion to one thing.
Yeah, they eventually will. A lot of things are compatible, but eventually, when push comes to shove or bang comes to crunch, you do have to choose.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, you know, you mentioned yesterday who or what is like shepherding your life, and I think you gave examples like, you know, what's the primary voice, leader, protector, provider, etc. That question and how you answer that question, I think, will reflect a lot of where your devotion is given.
That's good, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And for me, devotion is an intense word. It's like, it's not a small adjective. You know what I mean? It's enthusiastic. Mm-hmm. It involves love and emotion. It's active. It's not like passive. Nobody's passively devoted to something.
Right.
You know, they can be, but in some sense, like you're always devoted to it, or you care about it, you think about it. But that has been developed.
Devotion's kind of like holistic, as you're describing it.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
There are things that have taken place where I am like setting the trajectory of my heart and my mind and my soul and my being towards something. It's the ultimate priority of my life, and so I'm giving myself to it. And so the whole Matthew 6 passage came up. What you mentioned about you cannot serve two masters came up. But yeah, it's like it's for me, it's like what are you enthusiastic about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What are the voices you're listening to that like influence you? What are you looking to in fear and anxiety, for comfort, for affirmation, for identity? So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would just add to maybe think of the contrast to devotion. I think maybe you would think of it in terms of maybe apathy or disconnection, which is kind of obvious, but maybe more accurately, it's the idea of like hedging. Like I'm going to split up my hopes, or I'm going to split up what I trust or I'm confident in or devoted to between a couple of different things. Yep. And so that way, if the one doesn't work out, diversifying your portfolio of loves, essentially, which can be really destructive. And a lot of times when you're doing that, you feel like you're being devoted, but to a bunch of different things.
Yes.
And so it's like if you have multiple priorities, are you even prioritizing anything? And if you're devoted to a bunch of different things, you're not devoted to anything. And so I think the idea of, singular focus, sacrifice, willing to not go down other paths, but
the whole
into the one.
Yeah, that's the whole James talks about, a divided heart.
Right.
Mentions it in James 1 and James 4. And I think, honestly, if I do a lot of inventory in my own life, my heart can easily be divided like that. And so there's maintenance here.
Yeah.
And that's why I love the word. I love how you mentioned there's no description of a theological understanding of these wise men's faith and devotion.
Right.
You see it in their action. They walked 500 plus miles.
Yep.
They go into Jerusalem. They go to the palace. They're inquisitive. They're learning. They're in awe. And then they come and
they bow.
They bow down.
Physically, they're bowed down.
They bow down.
And then it says, I love it. They opened their treasures.
That was so good. I love that you said that. And so that's devotion. It's seen in action, and that has to be cultivated. That has to captivate you. It's got to be worked out. Which again, not to beat a dead horse, why I love the practice conversation here.
Yeah. So let me ask this question, and I have a little bit of the answer if you guys fumble it. No kidding.
AKA, that was Mike saying when we fumble it and don't give the answer he wants.
No.
Why don't you just give me the question?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, just text me the question. I'll ask you. We'll set you up, dude.
So if I'm, I have a single-hearted devotion to Jesus, but I really also love my job, or I really love my family. How do we do that? How do we be singularly focused on Christ? Let's just use the work one instead of a family one, and be passionate about my job.
Why don't you give the answer first?
Okay.
Seriously.
I think, Paul says in Colossians 3, I believe it is, that whatever you find to do with your hands, do it with all of your heart as unto the Lord.
Yeah.
And so what I don't want people to hear is, I need to be passionate about Jesus, and that phrase, I'm so heavenly minded, I'm no earthly good, like that type of thing, where I don't end up, obviously you're sitting across the table from you, I think about the music stuff that you're passionate about writing. Now, obviously you're writing music that's Christian, so it's a little bit easier as well, but I think there's room in the kingdom of God to be passionate about construction, or about being a doctor or a lawyer or a stay-at-home mom. Yeah, you know what I mean? And so I don't want people to feel like those are competing. In a sense, they could be competing, if you're, again, calibration, your heart, whatever, but I think we can do things whole. I think we should. I think we have a calling to be passionate about the things that God has called us to, and that's not antithetical to our passion for Christ. It's a way that our passion for Christ gets expressed.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about growing as a person of love, even through all these practices and things. And so, if I am doing my profession, or if I am interacting with my family, relationships, hobbies, whatever they might be, as a person of love, then, I'm not holding those things so tightly. I'm able to see how those things are gifts from the Lord, used to glorify Him, not finding my, my worth
Yeah.
in being wrapped up in those things. I mean, I think some of those ideas can be kind of cliche, but like that's all that we have. You know what I mean? Like that's like literally the thing is, am I going to work in my job as unto the Lord, or am I going to do it as unto man?
Yeah.
And one is being devoted to the Lord, no matter what your job is, and the other one is not.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, the Holy Spirit who lives inside of us kind of checks us when something that is supposed to be in submission to the Lord, as far as devotion, begins to take a priority. And so in a very simple way, what I like to do in my own life is be aware of the presence of God and who I am in Jesus everywhere I go. So quite literally, later this afternoon, I'm be around a bunch of people who aren't Christians, working out in a class and having a bunch of fun. And every time I go there, like I'm just aware that Jesus is with me. And in something simple like that, it's good for me to take care of my body. It honors the Lord. It belongs to the Lord. I want to have energy for my family. Paul even says bodily discipline is of some value. So it's like there are good things there in Scripture that talk to it. But I just know that my identity isn't there, but I have an opportunity to love and serve people, and that plays itself out. Now, there are moments where it's like, I don't like my boss. I don't want to be at work today. I don't like what I'm doing. I feel like this isn't contributing anything. And it's like, okay, well, what does the Bible and my devotion to Jesus say about some of those moments even? Things like in Ephesians 4, work hard with your hands so you might have something to give to those who are in need. And 1 Corinthians 10:31, you guys were dancing around, whatever you do, whether you eat or drink, do it all for the glory of God. And it certainly, honors the Lord to take care of and provide for our families and our wives and our kids, and to love one another and serve. So I think really practically, you can feel in your heart and in your circumstances when things that are supposed to be under Jesus start to kind of take the priority. And in those situations, it's just, what do the principles of Scripture say specifically about how we should be fleshing that out?
Yeah, that's good.
It's faith, faith is, again, another common concept to us as Christians, but really significant here. And I'm kind of seeing that in a fresh way with these guys, the connection between faith and devotion, as they follow that star, not having seen the Messiah underneath it, as they brought the gifts, in anticipation that there would be a king there.
Wow.
You know, and so it seems as though those two can really play off each other and compound each other when you are devoted to something that is still unseen to you. Still that you're placing your trust in something that you haven't necessarily seen, but is there. And then not only that, but to throw all your devotion into that, now you're getting to the whole, you're getting to the whole person.
You even talked about, to piggyback off of your love thing, you talked about, the contrast between Jesus as the shepherd king in his life as it would play out, and Herod, who was supposed to be caring for the people. Herod was using people. Jesus came to serve people. And so one way that you show your devotion to Jesus above all is that in all of these other things, you're serving the Lord and you're serving people. Rather than using people to build your own kingdom, you're serving in the Lord's kingdom. And so you're laying down your life and your rights and your preferences in love to build other people up.
Yeah. Which is that cruciform mindset. I'm crucified with Christ. My old life is gone. I'm here. I'm a new person, and I'm in the image of Jesus, and I'm walking the way he walked. That's good.
You mentioned the question, as sort of a self-evaluation, what is shepherding, or who is shepherding your life? Talk about that a little bit in terms of, there's a high degree of wonder, I think, that Jesus actually comes to shepherd us. So how can we faithfully follow him, and then how can we also, not in a guilt trip way, but how can we be aware of some of these false shepherds that seem to pop up? How can we be pros at evaluating that?
I think the shepherd metaphor is just really helpful, because I think it's nothing actually really new or profound. If you've been around Christianity a while, you know, like, for example, Romans 12:1 and 2, which says, don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. I think, in a sense, that's all I was really saying. But using the shepherd metaphor, I think, draws some certain things out. Like, like there's intention and design. And again, this isn't even like Christianese, but like if you read, articles and secular media, like, these companies have intentions for you. Mm-hmm. They have spent lots and lots of time and money from really, really smart people to get you to do and buy and go certain places and things.
Completely.
And so there's definitely an agenda. And again, not to be dramatic about it, but there is the enemy that is lurking, all around, and his influence is all over the place. And so I just think we need to be aware that the influences, the media, the market, the news channels, all of those things are seeking, they have an intention for you. And so I just think we need to be aware of what those shepherds, that's what I meant by what's shepherding you. It could be, a certain author, it could be certain music artist, it could be a combination of those things, it could be film, like there's lots of things that are out there. And I just think the shepherding metaphor kind of like opens my eyes, hopefully opens our eyes. It's a little bit of a different way to think about it, of like, no, you're being herded, and if you're not listening to the voice of the shepherd, like the true shepherd, then you could, almost like unknowingly, Satan's a deceiver. The desires of our heart by nature, by their DNA, I remember Paul Tripp saying that, are by their very nature deceptive. So we could be getting pushed and prodded into places where we don't really want to be, where Jesus doesn't really want us to be, because those influences are shepherding us. That's what I was trying to say by that.
This is where I think about, like, again, the process of the wise men and why devotion is such a great word. We were talking even earlier this morning, Dan, about how just from some of our reading interaction with podcasts about habits and rule of life stuff, you're always cultivating, creating habits, whether you're aware of it or not. Mm-hmm. And so when I look at my life and who's shepherding my life, what's shepherding my life, what are the primary voices, what do I look to for provision and for protection and for identity and stuff, if I find that those things aren't always Jesus or in all areas Jesus, it's like, okay, now I have a choice to make. And that's what I love about the story of the wise men. Like, they became aware of these things. Mm-hmm. You mentioned they would be familiar with the prophecy in Daniel. I think if we end up getting to some of the comet stuff, there's some really cool things there too that they might have been thinking. Mm-hmm. And then they were captivated, but they didn't just kind of like sit back and go, "Oh, it's a long journey. It's going to cost a lot. We don't even know where it's going to be, and it isn't worth it," and that type of stuff. Like, it was just like we're in, like we're just going to do it. And so then they map out a journey. Mm-hmm. They're seeking the king, and it's a journey. It takes time, and it comes with this incredible reward where, guess what? They're in the presence of Jesus, the Son of God, Son of Man, and they fall down. And here's what I love. Their response to Jesus in his presence was not that it was a wasted journey.
Right.
They could have chosen that moment like, this is a little underwhelming. We're going to keep our gifts now, or we're not going to bow down. When they finally arrived and met Jesus, it was worth it. Mm-hmm. It was worth every decision, every sacrifice along the way. And so for me, it's kind of like, okay, when you identify what is influencing and shepherding and leading your life, and it's not Jesus, you now have a decision to make. Am I going to believe that Jesus is going to be worth the shift here in my life, the shift in the road that I'm walking? And is he going to be worth giving my delights to? And then if I'm going to step out in faith, to your point, Dan, and like get these gifts ready, get my heart ready, myself ready, what's the plan? Mm-hmm. What's the first step? And how am I going to act out my devotion and cultivate and redirect my devotion toward the shepherd king of Jesus?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thinking about their reaction is really interesting. I'm an information guy, a 5 on the wheel. And so, if I traveled 550 miles because I thought a star might be pointing to the Messiah, and that was true, I feel like my response would be, we were right. You know what I mean? As opposed to like recognizing the value. And so there just seems to be, I mean, maybe they said that, who knows? But like there does seem to be this humble, devoted, worship-filled response where they're just like overwhelmed by what they found. It wasn't about them finding it. It wasn't about them figuring it out. It wasn't about them enduring all this on this journey.
Man.
They were just there.
Yeah, and I think part of that comes to, it's like they weren't rejoicing in the circumstances because, again, they weren't at the palace. They'd gone to that humble home. You know, I think what they were rejoicing in was the truth of the prophecies to some extent.
And again, just to be clear, we're talking about the 3 wise men, right? Okay.
Yeah, we're talking about their names technically are Casper, Melchior, and Balthazar. No. So,
You spell those?
yeah. They are, and even in the moment, it's not like this grandiose parade or anything. It's just like Mary and the baby. But they're so impacted by what God had revealed to them, both in His Word and apparently in the constellations.
Yeah.
That
Romans 1, Psalm 19.
Yes, the heavens declare the glory of God. And so I think, you know, we can be in that same boat. We don't have to have eyes to see the glory and all the majesty of the kingdom right here and right now. We have, you know, in Christ, in the church, in the scriptures, God revealing Himself to us so that we can rejoice in knowing that His kingdom actually is here. It's incredible. It's here. So, yeah. It's
incredible. Yeah. It's so, for those of you who would be listening, it's like, here's a big takeaway, at least for me, maybe takeaway for you. Jesus is definitely worth the journey.
Yeah, yeah. Amen.
And He is worth giving your devotion to. So hopefully, even in the weeks ahead, there can be a sense of like renewed devotion, and then even like how to cultivate that and practice the way of Jesus ahead. You did have, you know, you were super nerdy excited about this. If you're listening, you just missed it, but he just showed a book to the screen. Talk to us about this groundbreaking news.
Yeah. So it's called The Great Christ Comet. I think it was actually published in 2015. So just a couple of caveats. This is actually a good little test case about how to do biblical interpretation, you know, and how to be patient and careful and not like, you know, everything I'm about to say over the next 2 or 3 minutes is like with a asterisk of like upon further review, you know. So
the Mike's box thing.
This is definitely in the Mike box for sure. But that being said, there's something really compelling about it. You know, the book was published by a guy who has his PhD from Cambridge.
Heard of it.
So, you know, it's not like to put out a book like that is going to be peer reviewed, you know, by other scholars. You don't want to look silly. So, I mean, there's some credibility to that. Again, I don't want to like put too much stock in academia and things like that, but I'm just saying that to say that this was, you know, this was well thought out by someone who has, you know, legitimate biblical scholarship credentials. And then it was also reviewed by the foremost scientist on comets, like in the world. The guy who has written the 6-volume work, like kind of like this, not that I'm no astronomer, but like that's the guy that if you're going to talk about comets, he has a 6-volume work out that pretty much is like the textbook for everybody.
True.
So he collaborated. So you've got kind of like a top-notch biblical theological scholar who had the opportunity to work with kind of like one of the leading, who I don't even know if the guy's like a Christian, but like one of the leading scholars on comets. And so over a number of years, I think it took him like 3 or 4 years to write this book, but basically he makes a pretty compelling argument that the only thing that would have behaved in that kind of a way, I mean, it could be supernatural, it could have been an angel, but like from an astronomy standpoint, which is what's compelling, because like what would move these wise men to come?
Yeah, it's in the conversation.
Yeah, it's and so that being said, you know, he basically makes the argument like Herod asked. There's a couple of specific words in the passage I didn't get time to get into, but one is Herod wanted to know when did it appear, and then when did it rise. Those are astronomical terms. So comets appear, and then they can go away for a while. Again, I'm taking his word for it. but then they rise, meaning like right before dawn, and there's like they have spectacular risings. And so, and you see both of those two realities. Like there was a time when it appeared, and that's what would have gotten their attention. They're like, oh, whoa, what was that? That was out of the ordinary. We didn't expect that. Whoa, what is this? And so then they would have started checking their records. And then its rising would have been the thing that led them from the east over to Jerusalem. And then he even argues, which I think this is where it kind of stretches me a little bit. These great comets have a tail on them, and so you can look at these comets, Hale-Bopp comet, all kinds of different comets.
You got some cool pictures in there.
Yeah, there are some pictures in there that if you want to see them. But like, and the tail can literally seem like it's pointing to a building. I mean, and so it's not impossible. There is a astronomical phenomenon that can account for all of the things that we see in a passage. Now, again, whenever something feels super neat and tidy with the Bible, you should have, and this is where I want to say as your pastor, you should have a little bit of a check in your spirit like, boy, that seems almost like a little too clean, okay? So again, I'm saying that as a caveat. Now, so you got the astronomical part of it. The other part of it that's interesting is they call it his star. So, and there's definitely a quote from Numbers 24 with Balaam, who, by the way, was another Gentile prophet. That these guys were functioning in the same way. And so that's where the whole star metaphor comes from, Numbers 24:17. Give me a second to get there. But that quotes, that's why I think they call it his star. They were familiar, there was a tradition ever since these days that I see him but not now, I behold him but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. And so there was then this prophetic tradition that with the coming of the one, there would be an astronomical star. There would be, in the heavens would declare this. And so that tradition grew, and then obviously you've got the Daniel. Daniel talks about the stone in Daniel 2 that is ultimately becomes the mountain that fills the stone that crushes all the other kingdoms. That's a prophecy about the coming one. And then even more so in Daniel 7 with all the different beasts and how that the Son of Man, this promised king of Israel, would come and conquer all the other beasts. So there's definitely this prophetic tradition going around and in Babylon where we're looking for a star, an astronomical sign of a king and a kingdom that would come and rule all of the nations. And so I just think those guys had access to that kind of thing. The last thing I would add that he puts in here, and this is from Revelation chapter 12, is that there's a very high likelihood, according to his calculations, and again, reviewed by other comet specialists and software, and you can plug in astronomical bodies, and then you can like literally trace it forward and backwards through the algorithms. But basically, he argues that this comet would have fallen through the constellation Virgo, which is the constellation for the Virgin. And then it would have made its path from the Archer, which is another constellation, through Hydra, which is a beast. So almost like there's this like constellation display, and this is what Revelation 12 talks about, how that there's a woman in the sky who's giving birth. She's clothed with the sun, and then the child is rescued from the dragon, Revelation 12. So again, all of those things, again, I would say as your pastor, one of your pastors, like, be careful with this type of thing. You can read too much into it. It can sound so good, and you start drawing all these conclusions. But I'm interested to see how this conversation goes. Again, the book was published in 2015. There's certain reviews for it out there. But just I would say this kind of in conclusion to it, it would not surprise me, and this is how we think as a biblical worldview, that indeed the general revelation of God is then confirmed and clarified by special revelation. Yep. So they looked at the stars, and maybe they understood a little bit of this drama, but it's interesting, then when they get to Jerusalem, they still need special revelation. They ask the Jews, where is he supposed to be born? Oh, Bethlehem, because it's been revealed specifically by the prophets. Yep. And so I just think that's an interesting kind of test case about how we see the Bible, how we see it interacting with the natural world around us. But ultimately, the clarity and the sufficiency that we need actually comes from the Scriptures. But I think these wise men are an example of someone who's outside that the Lord brings in. And another thing is, like, God has revealed himself in ways, I think we limit God. Like, he has the ability to reveal himself in the natural world in ways that I think would surprise. I mean, this is certainly surprising. I mean, if you had told me this and it wasn't in the Bible, I'd be like, I'd be skeptical. But hey, here's God revealing Himself to these magi. So,
well, He put the stars in the sky,
right?
Yeah. So
maybe for this,
exactly.
I mean, one of many.
Yeah. And go ahead.
No, it really is captivating.
Yeah. So,
are you making the case that you don't believe Santa's reindeer comet was the first Christmas comet?
That's exactly the case I'm making.
Okay.
Airtight.
Airtight. Yeah.
Next week
is?
What are we doing these next 2 weeks, Pastor Mike?
This coming Sunday, obviously a new year. We've been talking a lot about the practices anyway. We've just taken like a 5 or 6 week break. And they fit very nicely into kind of like a renewal, what rhythms and patterns and habits, as you spoke about a few minutes ago. So we just kind of want to renew that for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So I'll take a week this coming Sunday, and I want to talk a lot about what it means to be in new creation and what new creation rhythms, what it means to really practice resurrection. I like that. That's from Eugene Peterson. And then the week after that, Pastor Dave will preach more specifically on the two that we kind of covered already, prayer and fasting, how they kind of go together. And so those will be the next couple of weeks. So we'll be, in a sense, be doing a little bit of a summary and recap and sharpening of how we can engage this new year, because I know many of us will be thinking about our rhythms and our patterns. How can we make sure that we are prioritizing the reality of the kingdom of God, new creation in our lives, so that we can maximize our experience of new creation through kingdom practices? So that'll be the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, and then probably as early as this Sunday, we'll start giving you some dates for the next few months to put on your calendar for a Saturday a month where we're going to have a practice workshop. Yeah, basically, you'll spend your morning here, and we'll. It's just going to be dialogue and actual practice and some activities and conversation around specific practices and how we follow Jesus in this way.
Yeah, we've been really trying to be committed, as you guys know, in this practices series to actually doing.
Right.
Like we want to actually, and again, like you're talking about the journey of these wise men, kind of like mapping it out and giving it, in a sense, our best devoted effort, and recognizing that, the Lord takes our 5 loaves and 2 fish and does way more with them, and we continue to grow. So we're really looking to continue to apply some of these practices, and I'm looking forward to those workshops as well.
Big time.
Yeah, one of the big things with that will be connecting with other people to carry some of these things out. Mm-hmm. And so one of the real, two among many real dangers in these things, I mean, you can think a lot about prayer. You can think a lot about fasting. You can think a lot about the scriptures and walk away, maybe like these magi, they figured it out in the heavens and they didn't walk the 550 miles or whatever you said it was. Mm-hmm. So, we definitely don't want to be people who...
Well, the religious privileged people, they thought a lot about it. They knew the answer, and they didn't even walk 5 miles.
Yep.
Exactly.
And, to think that we would just, be able to do these things just by knowing about them. They need to be practiced and worked out. So to give us some space to work it out, but also we don't want to be doing these things alone. We want to be, with a community of people who are also doing these things so that we can learn and grow from each other in a very, in that very specific way as we follow after the Lord together. So
I heard just here at the end, I heard an analogy recently that I'd heard many times before. I'm like, oh, that's a really good one, of fire. And how like flame, and you talk about devotion and passion is maintained. When you like separate all of the logs, they go out. That's how do you put a fire out? Separate all the things. How do you keep a fire burning? Keep the logs together. And so I think that's part of this community thing. Like if you want to have a sustained passion and devotion, which we all know that there's ebbs and flows on this journey, but if you want to have a sustained, steady, hot, kind of burn, so to speak, with the Lord, then that needs to be in community where other people can fuel you and help you, and you can help them along the way too. So.